Now let's go ahead and turn our attention to the monetarist model or the monetarist economic theory, and it's associated with the work of Milton Friedman. And basically, the monetarists are going to go ahead and challenge the Keynesian theory that monetary policy is rather ineffective. So there's going to be a few different reasons why. As we can see right here, consumption does depend on income and wealth. This is one of the main assumptions under the monetarist model, and that is something that Milton Friedman came up with the permanent income hypothesis. Basically, the main idea is that if we change your income, if we increase your income, that's going to change your consumption because your income has gone up, your wealth has gone up. So that's why monetary policy expansionary monetary policy is going to have a huge impact on the economy as a whole. However, we want to go ahead and do the same methodology that we did with the Keynesian theory and see why exactly monetarists believe that fiscal policy is ineffective and why monetary policy is going to be good for us. So here, let's go ahead and build this up with the monetarist model. Monetarist model. With the monetarist model, they are basically going to believe just the opposite of the Keynesian model because they challenged them. So they challenged the Keynesian theory. The Keynesian theory. And with the Keynesian theory, remember they said that fiscal policy was very effective, but monetary policy was very ineffective. So we're just going to change a few things with that. We move in the opposite direction. And the monetarist model basically argued two things. They argued that fiscal policy has to be financed. Fiscal policy must be financed. Must be financed. So changes in government spending, changes in transfer payments, changes in taxes, that's all going to add to the deficit and debt of a particular nation. So it has to be financed in some way. And the ways that the government can finance their deficits, we've already talked about them, is number one, by increased taxation. So here, by increased taxation. This is going to be impact number one. So if the government runs some type of deficit, if they want to pursue a lot of expansionary fiscal policy, they have to finance it. And the one way that the monetarists sort of argue is that it's going to have to increase taxation. So here they have to pay for it some way. So that's the government going to increase your taxes. And when they increase your taxes, that's going to lead to lower consumption. So here it lowers your consumption. We don't like taxes. Remember, if our taxes go up, our disposable income goes down. So therefore, our consumption goes down as well. That's going to be multiplied by the multiplier effect. And that causes a huge downturn within the economy. So first argument that the monetarists have is that fiscal policy must be financed by increased taxation. But they can also finance this deficit or this fiscal policy with increased borrowing. So we can put the secondary impact right here and or increased borrowing. And with increased borrowing, remember, this is going to lead to the crowding out effect. So crowding out effect. If they have increased borrowing, remember we have the government budget constraint, we have the change in B, we have the change in M, the change in A. We're hitting on the change in B here. So the government is going to sell bonds to the public, so people like you and I, but once they sell bonds to the public, if they keep on doing this year after year after year, because they keep on increasing, they keep on pursuing expansionary fiscal policy and increasing the deficit and the debt, it can eventually lead to the crowding out effect, which leads to higher interest rates. So leads to higher interest rates. And if interest rates are pushed higher, what does this mean? It means that you and I are hurt once again, but also firms and businesses, because it lowers consumption and investment. So there's a twofold effect of exactly why monetarists believe that fiscal policy is rather ineffective during times of downturn. We have increased taxation, which lowers consumption for you and I, and we have increased borrowing in order to finance the deficits, which leads to the crowding out effect, which increases interest rates, which is just the exact opposite of what we want during an economic downturn. And as interest rates get pushed higher, it lowers consumption and investment. So because of these arguments right here, what do the monetarists believe is going to be best for the economy? That's where monetary policy is going to be very, very effective. So the main conclusion that we draw out of this is that monetary policy is effective in the short run, due to the usual monetary mechanisms. Due to the usual monetary mechanisms. So essentially what we laid out at the beginning of this particular chapter, these open market operations are going to change the interest rate, and the changed interest rates are going to have an impact on the components of GDP, so CIG and net exports. So basically what we have here, the monetarists say fiscal policy bad, monetary policy good. However, there is a similarity between the monetarist model and the Keynesian model, and that's what's going to happen in the long run. So suppose that we are already operating in our long run equilibrium. So suppose we are operating at point E right here. We have equilibrium price P0 and full employment GDP at QF. What would happen if the government decided to pursue expansionary fiscal policy, or if the central bank decided to pursue expansionary monetary policy? We notice that both of these are going to have impacts on the aggregate demand curve. We shift our aggregate demand over to the right, away from the origin, and in the short run we end up at point B with higher prices and a higher GDP in the short run. However, remember that this situation cannot last forever, and if we sort of just leave the markets alone at this particular point, what is that going to do? Remember, as prices go up, workers are going to demand higher wages. They are going to go to their bosses, go to their employers, and ask for raises. And this is going to be an input price that increases, that shifts the SRAS curve over to the left, and we end up in long-run equilibrium back at point C with higher prices back to our long-run equilibrium. So essentially what we see right here is demand pull inflation making its way once again. So in the long run, both Keynesians and monetarists believe that once we hit our long run equilibrium, our full employment GDP, we should not be pursuing any more expansionary policies, because all that's going to do is lead to demand pull inflation and higher prices in the long run as we transition to E to B to C. So there can be impacts in the short run, but in the long run, we'll just converge back to our long run equilibrium with QF level of GDP. In terms of the classical model, remember that this happens instantaneously. We go from E to C instantaneously without any sort of short-run impacts at point B. So essentially, so as we can see from all of this, in the long run, all three of these models basically have the same idea in mind, that any type of expansionary policies beyond our full employment level of GDP is only going to lead to inflation. So once again, a little bit of a similarity between all three of these particular models, but remember that there are very, very big differences between all of them in the short run. We'll go ahead and wrap up this particular section by just taking a closer look at the political implications and give you a quick summary of all of these theories in a little table in the next video.